Expedition 33 just had its first major balance patch. I'm gonna go over all of that there, everything in the new patch, as well as how certain abilities and weapons were nerfed. I'll have several damage calculation formulas that you can use and utilize, and several comparisons. Well, that'll lead us onto some official developer and social updates, and then last up we'll go over those community mentionables. We got a ton to talk about. What's up world, it's Utopia back in with another video. Today we're checking out all things Expedition 33. Let's just jump right into it. So patch 1.2.3 is now live as of last night around 3 AM my time, and there are a host of changes in this. I know the first ones people are going to talk about is what is going on with the weapon and skill fixes, that tuning there. Let's just go right into that. Let's jump into all the comparisons there and our new damage formula. So first off, we do have a few things here that change. Now these first two specific fixes actually do apply to weapons, where the lithium attribute scaling was not working at high level. They've reduced that initial vitality scaling from A to C. It will still end up around S at max level. However, they've also added luck scaling that will start at D. Now, if Expedition does follow the way it is in other RPGs and how they scale, essentially each grade here will have a different percentage based on each point and how it affects the weapon. So essentially we do from grade S through D, and those should vary based on scaling per attribute point. So if we look here, D is 0.5 to 0.99, whereas if we go up to C, it's 1.0 to 1.24, all the way up to S, which is a 1.75 to 2.0. So it essentially got nerfed from a 1.7 all the way down to a 1.0 to a 0.5, at least as far as that luck scaling starting at D. And then for that vitality A to C, that got nerfed from 1.75 to about 1.24 or 1.0. Again, these are rough estimates to kind of calculate how your damage affects that number and kind of what percentage decline you would see. If you didn't know, essentially early on you actually should put your points into might over scaling. At least that's recommended by most. However, later on in your leveling, as well as if you're leveling up the weapon, it actually is better to scale with the weapon itself and then put any extra points into might. This same thing applied to the Blizzon, although this one had attribute scaling that was not working at higher levels, but they've also reduced the initial luck scaling from B to C. Again, still going to end at S when you're at max level, level 33, and they've added the defense scaling starting at D. So 2 additional nerfs there, other than the one that we're going to go into that has a damage calculation formula. This is a major one here, and this nerfs my L quite a bit. So if we look here, they've actually nerfed both the Metalum and the Stendhal. Metalum had its third Lumina doubling all damage in Virtuous Stance, instead of doubling only burn damage. So yes, all of your abilities were essentially being doubled in Virtuous Stance with this weapon at max level. That's why the damage calculations were way off. It didn't make any sense at all. I noticed that as well. I was hitting for like 12 to 15 mil. Then as soon as I got Metalum, my damage ramped from 15 million all the way up to 86 million, which was just quite staggering. I knew the numbers were off there. So that's a 50% base nerf already. Then the Stendhal also got reduced by an additional 40%. So while I was hitting for a max of 86 million on a crit, I have now tested this. I am now hitting for a max of 26 million on a crit, which actually perfectly applies to both damage outputs here. And so essentially when I doubled that number 26 to 52, then applied the 40% damage nerf, so I increased that by 60%, I did get my 86 million perfectly accurate. Now there is a damage case formula here, but there is an easier way to do it. Essentially you could take your base damage and reduce it by 2 different fractions here, or percentages and decimals. If you are using both the weapon and the ability, this case has 2 reductions of 50% and 40%, where you do come out, again, approximately 86 million down to 25.8. However, there's a much easier damage formula here. You just take your final damage and your base damage and multiply it by 0.7, which is essentially a 70% damage reduction when we do take those 2 percentages together. And so overall, it's basically a 70% damage nerf with this ability in combination with the weapon. Quite significant there. Again, going from 86 million to 26 million is a pretty big nerf, although you basically one-shot everything in the game anyways. At that point, there's only like 1 or 2 bosses and mobs that you won't one-shot at 26 million. That's already a pretty insane number. I was one-shotting everything at 15 and 21 million aside from a couple. And yeah, again, I wasn't hitting for those billion crits, as there's a few ways to do so with different setups and different ability procs. But overall, that is the damage nerf. That wasn't all with the patch though. There are a plethora of other changes. First up here, they had a various of ultra-wide fixes that included things with combat UI. The game will no longer minimize upon changing settings into ultra-wide. Cutscenes won't letterbox into 32:9 aspect ratio, since you're basically already in a letterbox ratio. Title screen will now display properly, and a few other option menus will no longer be stretched. That does include some mouse and keyboard changes here. Now, I actually do play on mouse and keyboard. I know a lot of people play on a controller. I haven't used the controller in over 8 years, so I'm super bad with it. So I just use a mouse and keyboard when I can. This includes a host of fixes here, with UI prompts in the Expedition menu are now visible and fully triggered with the keyboard. Mouse buttons do not become unresponsive after first use. This next one here was mouse cursor on the screen using WASD or directional arrows will now navigate the UI and trigger any other functionality. Those will no longer hide the cursor instead of doing the intended action. Yeah, you can see that here my mouse is still displayed in the menu when I want to move it around. I also thought this one was going to apply to the map. Not gonna lie, one of my biggest and only gripes with the game was the navigation on mouse and keyboard with the map section. The map is absolutely horrid to navigate on a mouse and keyboard. The response on it just doesn't feel very good, so I hope they could fix that later on. I honestly thought this fix was for that, but no, it's still absolutely terrible. If you move your mouse, it basically stops the response, and it's just way too fast and clunky. It just doesn't feel very good, so I'm hoping they adjust that in the future. A few other various fixes here with the left mouse button. Click no longer blocking the player. That's why using keyboard to navigate menus. Again, we went over that. And the mouse input is not lost after the first jump encounter if it is pressed only once. I didn't really notice that. I don't use my mouse in combat a ton aside from when I have to shoot, but I could see that being an issue for that. There's also a bunch of map fixes here where you could get stuck. Now, I'll blank out a few of these so I don't spoil anything or any locations that you do want to see later on, but a bunch of fixes for areas that you could get stuck or things blocking your path for various rocks. So some good changes there. There was also some fixes for SK that would get stuck. They said poor guy. Again, a bunch of cases here that he could get stuck on different elements or different pathing, or even the entrance level. There was this one here taking off from paint bridges, making him fall through the bridge and restricting the movement. If you didn't actually see, the paint bridges are these little bridges here that you can walk over that you've basically used to path across different areas and sections. Those are the ones that kind of prevent you from going too far into a different area that you shouldn't be just yet, at least before you get flying or that you can swim in the water. Yeah, essentially that is a paint bridge. They also had an other section here for various fixes. Again, different encounters that I'll block out there as I don't want to spoil anything. There was this really major fix in here. These are for some major plot points in the story. Again, gonna blank out those entirely, but essentially they fixed things that were basically game breaking, at least that were happening within the story. So really glad to hear they got those fixes out and covered. They actually had a closing statement here saying this is the first in a series of patches they're looking to do over the coming months. They're still investigating many feature requests and issues for future updates. Again, please fix the map stuff on mouse and keyboard. Moving on here, we had some official dev updates, community mentionables, social updates. This new one here is small, but Expedition did actually change their profile picture. And yes, it is now a picture of SK. Obviously, with the reception toward him, it does seem like they wanted to change that. So pretty cool overall. They also ran a poll for are you a we or are you a woo? And it really is nearly perfectly balanced right now. The final results were 50.4% for woo and 49.6% for the we. Pretty insane how balanced they have that one there. Now, I went over some record breaks in my last video, but they're already receiving new rewards here. Expedition 33 wins Player's Choice for April, and that is through PlayStation. So just more rewards, probably plenty more to come. We also have two last community mentionables here. This first one, this person mentions it's finally here. I am super jealous of this, but they got the collector's edition of Expedition 33. The statue just looks so good. I really wish I could have got my hands on this. I should have looked into it way more since I knew about Expedition 33 quite early, although it is fairly expensive, but I'm still super jealous of this overall. We also had this funny post I figured I'd have to cover. They made a do-it-yourself gestural. It's so way too entirely accurate with this one, and again, another really fun one there. And actually, there was one last mentionable here. If you did have any questions for Jennifer English, it seems like Dan Allen Gaming is running an interview with her, so I do believe we'll see a Q&A session with that. Pretty cool overall. If you want to check that out, you can head to it, and I'll link to it down below in the description, as well as everything else I covered. If you enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe, and until the next one, deuces.